Hey folks, Dave Temple here. As you know, my podcast is all about talking to the best thriller writers in the world. Now, while I don't put myself in that category of the best, I've certainly got my hat now in the ring. And after nearly 3 years of hosting this podcast, I think it's time to toot my own horn, if you will. So with that, I'm offering my thriller, The Poser, for sale all this month. It stars Detective Pat Norelli, a rookie cop working the overnight beat in Hollywood when one of the town's biggest stars is found dead in her Hollywood Hills home only hours after winning an Oscar. Beloved by her fans, Pat thinks someone wants this star dead and sees this as a way to forge her own path and get the promotion she craves. I'm proud of the response I've gotten from fans, and I'm confident you're going to like The Poser. So for the rest of this month, you can get the ebook for only $5 or the paperback for $14. Since I do this weekly podcast as a free service, perhaps you'd consider this as a way to help out a fellow thriller writer. There are two ways to reach the link. First, you can go to davidtemplebooks.com, scroll down to see The Poser, click, and you're on your way. Or head over to Amazon. You can find it there. Again, davidtemplebooks.com or Amazon. Thanks in advance for your support. And now, on with the show. Hello and welcome to The Thriller Zone. Happy March to you. I am so excited to announce that today's show features Bill Landay with a book called All That Is Mine I Carry With Me. Here's Bill on The Thriller Zone. I do want to ask this. I'm David Temple. I'm the host. Do you have a hint of this show?
No.
Okay. That's okay. I spent weeks referring and researching your book that I love, but it's okay.
I go from one to the next.
Bill, I do want to say welcome to The Thriller Zone.
Happy to be here.
This book, which we're going to get to in a second, All That Is Mine I Carry With Me. When I first saw that, I'm going to say it first. I'm like, oh, it's a house, it's a storm. You know, there's probably some evil going on inside. Who knows what? And I don't want to geek out too much out of the gate, but easily one of the best books I've read this year, maybe in the last couple of years.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind.
And I'm not saying that to be nice because we just met and you don't know me and you've never watched my show before. But I do want to say, I learned of you. I am a new fan. I'm going to go ahead and give you that up in case you haven't figured that out by now. My wife and I watched Defending Jacob, was that book number 3?
Yes.
Okay. The 8-episode TV series starring Chris Evans, Michelle Dockery of Downton Abbey, and Jaeden Martell, as Jacob, which, dude, that show, and again, usually when I start out of the gate with so many accolades, people are sitting there going, yeah, right. But one of the best TV series of the last couple of years, easy.
Oh, thank you. I would love to take credit for it, but that really wasn't my doing. It's a wonderful writer named Mark Bomback who really had the lead on that and who deserves all the credit.
While I don't want to argue with my guest who is the star, I have to say it did start with you, Bill. So
That's true. In fact, it's a very strange. We would go to the set a few times, and it is very strange to see actors and a cast of however many and a crew of 200 bringing to life this thing that you just made up. It makes it real in a way that a book never quite becomes real.
Right.
It's very strange to hear actors reciting lines that you just invented. It's just a surreal process.
I see that. I get that. I can't imagine it in one sense. The fact that you're especially with the business that's so solitary. You're in your room, you're at a coffee shop, wherever you write, and you're knee deep in this for weeks, months, maybe years at a time. And all of a sudden you stumble onto a little slice of Hollywood and it's, I wrote that phrase. Oh, I wrote that one too. I mean, it's so cool, isn't it?
It's very true. And that's the thing that is most striking about it. I spend years in a room alone, and that's just the nature of what I do. And the product, books too, are consumed in privacy. Even if you're on a crowded subway car reading the book, you are consuming it internally all by yourself. And you go into this collaborative profession where there are literally hundreds of people involved, And the way it's consumed too is, people sitting around in a room. It's a shared experience. It's completely different, and it's really for someone who's been isolated by this work for years at a time.
Yeah.
It just feels so seductive. You just want to be part of it.
You also want to see it done again and again, don't you?
You want to. It's I look at it as a lottery ticket. I can't imagine it happening more than once. If it does, I'd certainly be all for it.
And here's the other thing, Bill. Defending Jacob, for instance, that was created, I'm going to say 2012. So we're talking about 11 years ago. Mm-hmm. And then it takes, how soon after it debuted? And it debuted at New York Times bestselling list, didn't it?
Yeah. It was on the list very quickly.
Okay, let's just stop and absorb that a second. So you've got that. How long before that to the gestation time of actually showing up on screen? Ballpark.
It had a little bit of a tortured history because it wound up on Apple TV, but it was originally optioned for film. And so it was with a studio and they kind of sat on it. And lots of things are optioned and never made. It's a very shallow funnel. There's a lot of material coming in and very little coming out. So it sat for a couple of years before it got to this production company. It's a very long, haphazard kind of process, and you need a long string of yeses, and one no can end it.
Yeah.
So you have to get a little lucky, and it took a long time before it got to this producer. But I have to say, once it got to this guy who was really passionate about it and could make it happen, it moved very quickly at that point.
Wow. Not to drop names, but I'm going to do it a lot this show. Are you familiar with a guy named Mark Graney?
I know the name.
Mark Graney, yeah. He wrote a series called The Gray Man. Ryan Gosling has since then turned it into it stars in the film. Great conversation I'm having with Mark not recently. He wrote that book, I want to say, 2009. It took from then, I'm referring to the conversation, from then to now for it to become this monstrous Hollywood bonanza. There's no rhyme or reason.
There's no rhyme or reason to it, and it could have gone that long and never made it to the finish line also. Some books just languish on the vine forever.
Yeah.
So you never know. You have to be good, but you have to be lucky also.
And you got to be a hell of a patient guy, too.
You do, although I have to say, for me, I've always looked at that as outside of my control. Mm-hmm. I don't take an active hand in those. They're kind of parceled out to film people. I really look at novel writing as a different art form, and these are just properties of mine that are being resold to create a new artwork from scratch.
Right.
So I don't sit around looking at my watch while it's out there being shopped.
Yeah.
Because I just don't consider it my project anymore. If I were actively involved in writing it, then I might be.
Yeah.
But up till now, I have not been.
Very healthy approach, Bill. Very healthy. Now, we're going to, one more point, and then I want to get on to this book. But it's hard to believe. I cannot imagine. This just shows you how fast time is moving, that it's been nearly 3 years that Defending Jacob came. It feels like, in one sense, and this is how you know a great story, it just hangs with you, and it just hangs with you on some kind of a level I can't even quite describe it. 3 years ago, it's up for what? Two Primetime Emmys, 2 wins, 8 nominations, and that doesn't just happen every time. You can get something greenlit and into production, and people go, "Oh yeah, it's pretty good." But to get that kind of accolades, bam.
Yeah, it was really an outlier experience for sure. When the people who were involved in it, starting with Chris Evans, these are top shelf people, and those are the kind of people who, 10 or 20 years ago wouldn't have even considered doing TV.
Right.
So the idea that these A-list movie stars are doing a series when it's your first book that's being adapted is not typical. I fully am aware of how lucky I am, and I probably will never be that lucky again. But that's okay.
Let's not say that. And by the way, folks, for those of you who are not watching the show but listening to it, you should see his face because, Bill, your face, the smile in your eyes, that wonder, and that excitement, that shit never goes away, man. And that's just true. That's what keeps you going, doesn't it?
It's super fun.
Yeah.
The whole experience was fun. And it's so, as I say, it's so different and such an antidote to the solitude of writing that it's a dream from start to finish.
Well, I would be a bonehead if I did not say this weekend, drop whatever you're doing and just watch it on, I think it's still on Apple TV.
Oh, sure.
Defending Jaguar. Yeah, watch it because you're going to love it. And by the way, one side note, I'm a hobbyist filmmaker myself, and I did 3 tours of duty in L.A. Insert chuckle there. It's well-deserved for cinematography because that's the one thing I walked away. I'm like, man, it isn't just great. I mean, Chris Evans, sure, he deserved the award for that he got. And Michelle was fantastic. The performance of Jaeden, that's what pulls you in. But that's cinematography, which a lot of people, like my wife, is just now really learning to appreciate that. And she's like, man, this has a different kind of a look. It pulls you in by its look and its color. And I'm like, cinematography.
It's very true. It has this cool blue sort of palette, a blue-gray kind of muted tones.
Yeah.
I agree. It's gorgeous.
Yeah. Okay, now let's jump into, now this is it's a handful of a title. All That Is Mine, I Carry With Me.
It's a title that's longer than most books.
Yeah. And I have to always look at it to read it that way. That's what a dunce I am. But it comes out in March. And let me just start here. Because I'm going to drown you in accolades. I'm going to tee you up now. And anybody who knows me knows that I will do the business side of, hey, that was a fantastic read, Bob. Really, thanks for coming. And then there'll be the times that I'm like, Bill, holy shit, this thing was rocking. And that's probably
I'm here for it.
Yeah, I'm going to stand in that little space. Here's what I love the most. And my wife she kind of comes through the room every once in a while and looks over my shoulder. Where are you? And all of a sudden, at one point, I'm halfway through it. And she goes, you just started that this morning. I'm like, well, this is what happens when A, you have a solid story, B, engaging premise, and C, long pages of conversation, which I personally love. A lot of people going, dude, give me some backstory. Tell me more of this story. Talk. I'm like, are you kidding me? That's the delicious part of this, especially, yeah, okay, sure, it moves the story along faster, but more importantly, it's the way you constructed it. You know, it cuts through so much of the formality that we do when we spend so much time. He said, she said, he glanced, he looked. No, boom, 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 down the pages. And you know, so insert appreciation there.
I love that too. That's an Elmore Leonard style of moving a story along and just expressing things doing your exposition through your dialogue. And I feel like it involves the reader in a way that those long prosy passages don't, because it calls on you to be interpreting as you're reading, and you have to be awake and alert and involved. I love it as a reader when I encounter that kind of storytelling.
Yeah, and Elmore Leonard, what a great pull. He's one of my favorites of all time.
He was the master at that, at telling stories through dialogue.
The master, and he would take, sure he's famous for take out all the stuff that bores people or something to that effect. But the way he cuts to the chase in dialogue, and you did this too, and you would give the reader just enough of a hint, Stephanie, so you'd know. You wouldn't have to go, he turned to Stephanie and said, or Stephanie said. And not to belabor the point, but I just wanted to applaud you because it's little things like that that make the reading process so efficient. And here's my biggest point. I want to make sure I want to say this, is that I love, and I just had this same conversation with a gentleman recently, Rick Blywis, about the art of conversation. And I feel like we've kind of lost it, don't you think? I mean, it's this. You think of all the noise of social media and all the clickbait and all that, but sometimes I think maybe not lost, but I feel like we have. No, I'm going to say lost. We've lost the art of conversation. Yeah, there, I said it.
It's true. Well, we've been all isolated now for a few years, and it is true. The one thing to keep in mind, though, is that when you're writing dialogue like that for fiction, it's stylized. It's meant to ring in your head in an evocative way, in a way that seems true to life. But if you actually were to transcribe conversations that people have and just put that down on paper the way people actually speak, it would be incomprehensible. One of the experiences you get as a lawyer is you get trial transcripts, which are literal word for word transcripts of your own speech. And you realize how much is communicated by facial expressions and your intonation and gestures. And so when you are writing dialogue like that reads in a smooth, frictionless way that your eye just glides right down the page and you seem to be following that conversation, do bear in mind that is not intended to be a literal transcription of the way human beings speak.
Yeah, but it feels that way. And so,
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
It feels that way. And I understand that. I understand that we often talk in shorthand and we contract and we skip over details. But how did you learn that? And again, 4 books in, this feels like somebody who's your work feels like 12, 15, 18 books in.
It feels that way to me too, because I write in a way that is, I don't publish a lot. I don't publish anything that I feel isn't my best. I came to this from another profession, and the whole point of this was to work at the outer limit of your talent and swing for the fences every time. So for me, I kind of feel like, I'll take the time and agonize and throw out a lot of material along the way so that when, a reader sees my name on a book, they know that it's the best I could do given the tools I had at the time. So thank you, but that is my experience. It does feel like 12 to 18 books to me as well.
Well, and I mean that in a complimentary fashion, meaning it feels seasoned, like a professional. And let's go ahead and call out what you used to be, which is a former assistant district attorney, right?
Correct.
Which you are clearly now writing full time, correct?
Yes.
I mean, at this ripe young age, for crying out loud, you're able to.
Thank you for that.
You're able to turn from one and get into your real passion. But here's.
People are going to see my gray beard and they'll know you're lying, but okay.
I don't see it. All right. So let's talk about that for just a quick second. What is your favorite part of the writing process? Because if you're spending your 4 books in, you're not releasing very frequently. You're waiting until it's absolutely perfect. I get that. I totally get that. You're not dishing out hey, I had an idea. I just whipped this thing out and let's see if we can sell it. What's your favorite part of the practice?
That's a difficult question to answer because to me, every part of the process is difficult and doesn't get any easier in my experience, even as you continue writing and presumably getting more skilled. I don't feel any more mastery than after 4 books than I did after 1. It's always a struggle. It's always difficult. And so to me, when I think of the favorite parts of it, it's really just the opportunity to do this work, which our society does not privilege very many people to do. But it's an exceptional kind of work precisely because it gives you that chance to be excellent, to live with passion and work with passion and produce work that at least aspires to be transcendent and long-lived. most of the work that most people do is pretty ephemeral and pretty local, and doesn't really give you the opportunity to put a dent in the universe that way. So this is a privilege to be able to have one of those jobs that lets you at least try and gives you a shot. That sounds grandiose, and I don't mean to say that I succeed at that necessarily. And I think that most books that most writers produce vanish, and they sink like a stone. But every now and then, you at least have a chance of a book that will endure.
Couple of things that popped into my head when you were saying that, and you're so spot on. One is my wife and I were watching this new documentary on Netflix about golfers, and I turned to her last night. I'm like, why hasn't anybody done a documentary of behind the scenes of professional golfing before? Because it was fascinating. And part of what's fascinating is the fact that you realize that there's only, we're going to call it 100, 150. Don't want anybody bust my chops because I don't remember the exact number, but it's 100, 150 guys in the whole world that are like at the top of their profession. However, I'm going to go out on a limb here, guess, Bill, that there's more than 150 people playing golf in the world, me included, which is a comedy in of itself. But here's my point. When I was watching this show, I realized, man, the odds of getting to that top tier are so hard and so tight and so few. It's amazing anybody can. And then these guys, and then you wonder, how do they make millions upon millions?
Right.
Same thing
it's
with
even worse with the switch to digital now. It's worked essentially the way it's worked in music and increasingly in movies too, that there are a few hits at the top.
Yep.
That get a lot of resources put behind them and a lot of eyeballs on them. And then there's a steep drop off to what we used to call the mid list.
Yeah.
And so it's, new writers, there's always an excitement about a new writer coming on the scene. And there's, maybe 20 or 30 brand name kind of writers whose every book is published. And the people who are in between, the mid list writers, are really having a hard time making it. And in my case, it was my third book that hit. But for some people, it's their sixth or seventh book. And like a band that can only stay together for so long before they find their hit song, a lot of mid-list writers in this economy aren't going to be able to hang in there long enough to learn the craft and get to their big book. And so it feels like inevitably it has to be a net loss to society, because there are some of those mid-list writers who will not graduate to the top, because it used to be that the whales at the top would support the mid-list.
Right.
And increasingly that model is broken.
Well, here's another thing.
Depressing thought, isn't it?
Yeah. And a little discouraging and a little sad in a fashion. But I think this is where, and I'm going to sound like a self-help book, so forgive me. I'll tell you that up front. But this is where tenacity, like tremendous tenacity and patience, and just digging in and doing the work comes at it. Back to this golf thing. I don't know why I'm making such a big deal about this. I think because it's so good, but it relates to you. This is all about you, Bill. So just hang with me.
Isn't everything?
Well, as it should be. So I'm watching these guys last night, and they're playing like Tiger Woods. Let's use him as an example. He would do things that no one ever on the planet was ever possibly could imagine. But when you see his documentary, he realizes at a tiny age, he's out there swinging that club hundreds of times a day. Well, and that makes you go, well, of course, if I practice this to that degree, I could probably get there. And this is my point. I challenge writers not to give up, just to keep writing. And if you don't think it's that great, okay, go, well, this is good. Maybe I'll self-pub it or whatever, but I'm not going to take it to the bigs and keep moving. But the thing is to keep moving, right?
I think that's definitely true. And there's no easy way around that, because there's no reason for anyone to believe in an unpublished writer.
Right.
You have to, especially at the beginning, you have to grind your way through to at least get to the point of credibility. Because technically, anyone who hasn't published a novel is an unpublished writer. It's a credential that you could claim regardless of talent or accomplishment. And so you have to at least grind it out to get to that point where you have a first publication where you can, or a first manuscript where you can at least prove that there's a germ of something there. And that takes a lot of grinding and a lot of doggedness, perseverance through doubt, because it's reasonable for other people to doubt you until you've proven it. You got to prove it first, and that's a years-long process. It really is, and it's hard. A band or a director can be out there producing and sharing and performing in a way that a writer really can't. A writer has to grind away in solitude for years before you get to the point of even having something you can show.
Yeah. As Brad Taylor said this past week or so, he goes, David, if I had any idea that it was going to be as hard as it is, and this guy had a New York Times bestseller out of the gate, and he said, if I had known it was going to be this hard, I never would have done it.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
If anybody's considering this, you should run 1,000 miles in the opposite direction. It's not a fun profession. And like I said, it doesn't get easier. The goalposts just keep moving back and back and back. And it's a grind.
Yeah.
It's a privilege, but it's also a grind.
And everybody thinks it's easy because, all you got to do is sit down, put words on paper. That's all you got to do.
It's true.
Yeah.
And everybody has written something, even if it's only in high school. And so everybody feels like they're on the spectrum of, if I were a little better, then I could do this. And everybody has had the experience of reading a book and thinking, I could do this.
Right.
It reads easy enough, so how much harder could it be to write it? So,
all right. I do have this rhetorical question. What is it with attorneys that ends up turning out such amazing authors, or in the law profession? I don't get it.
I think it's two things. I think it's one, people who have a verbal facility are drawn to that profession because it rewards that. You stand up in court and you tell stories, or you at least string together sentences in a coherent way, in a way that other professions like accounting or architecture don't necessarily require. The other thing is it gives you good material to write about.
Yeah.
All drama is built on conflict of some kind, and courtrooms are where we settle our conflicts. And so you are presented with these stories that are just ready-made material for you. The hardest thing to find is a good story to tell. And as a lawyer, they kind of keep crossing your desk every day.
Yeah.
So I think it's both of those things. And it's just, a courtroom is such a stagey, theatrical situation anyway. So you have your material presented to you.
I was going to say, is it any surprise that courtroom dramas from way back were such hits on television? I'm going back to Perry Mason, which dates me. I'm sure
it just works. It just works. I mean, it's a dramatic stage to begin with. You have the conflict built in. The roles are formal, and there's a limited amount of explaining you have to do because we all kind of understand how courtrooms work, even if you've never set foot in a courtroom. So it's this formal, stagey, familiar format that people are able to plug into, even without any special training.
And speaking of attorneys and judges in courtroom, I haven't been this thrilled by a psychological thriller since I read David Ellis's Look Closer. Are you familiar with David Ellis?
No, I know the writer. I don't know that book, though.
I just happen to have it here handy.
And another house on the cover.
Another house on the cover. Dude, I ripped through. May I call you dude?
You may.
This is knocking on 500 pages. One of the best books I read in 2022.
Sounds great. I'll add it to my list.
Please do. I mean, and tell them I sent you. No, but seriously, I don't want to go on too much of a tangent because it's going to sound ethereal, but I'm going to do it anyway. I know that writing is a collection of words creatively orchestrated to, form an engaging story. But I genuinely marvel, and I don't think I've ever used this word on the show, and I'm 120 plus episodes in. I genuinely marveled at the signature style and voice of your book that cuts through. It's so specific.
Well, thank you. It's a complicated book in some ways, and it's hard to talk about without spoilers, because it's structurally complex as well as being an interesting story. It's told in a way that isn't necessarily linear, and some of the jolts and the changes in time frame and point of view require the reader to do some of the assembly herself.
Well,
and that I find is engaging too, because it, one of the interesting things about reading is it's an active art form. It requires the audience to participate with music or movies or plays. You can sit there and the show will be performed for you, and you take it in passively. With a book, you're presented with essentially the sheet music. It's a bunch of squiggly lines on a page, and you bring to it your skill as a reader in lifting those words up and performing the story for yourself in your head. So when a book is presented to you that is kind of a puzzle and requires you to make some leaps yourself, it engages the reader in a way that is even more active and more participatory, and you feel this active involvement in the story in a way that a flatter form of storytelling doesn't necessarily engage you. And so that's kind of the goal of that kind of storytelling. It's the novelist and the reader working together to create this experience.
I couldn't have said it better and without giving anything away. Let's do this. Let's take a short break.
It's very hard to talk about this book without giving things away.
I know, it is, and I'm biting my tongue. We're going to take a short break. We're with William Landay, and the book, of course, is All That Is Mine, I Carry With Me. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
The best thrillers, the Thriller Zone.
And now, back to the show.
And we're back. Bill Landay is our guest, and I'm telling you, man, All That Is Mine, I Carry With Me is one of those books, as we said right before the break, that it's so funny. I'm catching both of us dancing around that. I want so desperately to say about three things, and I don't do this very often. And I'm like, oh, wait till you get to so and so, but because I know I can't say that. I can say, and if I screw this up, Bill, tell me and I'll fix it in the edit. But it's written in 4 books. It's actually called 4 books inside, book 1, book 2. And you're into book 1, the first section, and you're loving it. I'm rolling along. I'm like, yeah, I got this. And then you hit book 2, and that opening line, which I cannot read, which I want so desperately to, because I tend to do that. Reads, when you read the first sentence, you're like, wait a minute, what? Back to what you just said before the break. You as the reader are now asked to sit down. Someone has just shaken the box, emptied it on the table, and said, there's your puzzle. Get to it, baby.
Right. I think that's an engaging way of telling a story. One of the inspirations for this was Atonement, Ian McEwan's book, which jumps around and has a big reveal about who was writing it, who the actual author is of that story at the end. But that book moves in tone as well, and that was one of the great reading experiences I've had. Is there's a moment at the end of that book where the pieces fall into place, and you realize, aha, now I see what it was about. And so, you're trying to recreate that experience that I had as a reader, and in turn give it to other readers, and it's a neat trick if you can pull it off.
Well, and that's the perfect tee up for me to say this. And again, for my listeners who have been with me for a year and a half, and they hear me say similar things over and over, it's just part of the deal. But I don't say things like that, like this, and that is, It's I see, because I read so many books for this show, any 2 to maybe 3 books a week I'm reading, trying to anyway, to get to, so I can have a great conversation. And very little, hate to say this, folks, but it's true. There's so little true originality out there these days. I'm not going to mention any names or any genres, but there are certain genres that we have on the show. You got a pretty good idea. When you pick up the book and you look at the cover and you start reading, you know exactly what you're in for. You know exactly what you're in for. And part of that is the beauty that you do it for, because you like what you are getting. However, with this one, which is so original, nearly thoroughly original, that you find yourself going, okay, all right, maybe I've read this somewhere, but I don't think so. And that's just kudos times kudos to you.
Well, I think that's what's cool about it is we've all had those experiences of opening a book and thinking, I've kind of read this before, and you kind of know what's coming. And those experiences tend to be flat. There are reading experiences where the book really does come to life and grab you. And there are books that you just kind of, wander through or grind through to get to the end. And honestly, that's the more typical experience. Those magical, vivid, electric reading experiences where the book really grabs you. Those are the books that, they're the reading experiences that you remember and that energize you to read the next 10 books, but they're rare. It's the rare book that can do that. And I do feel like if you want to create in the reader an exceptional experience like that, you really have to go outside the usual forms, because we're just very late in the life of this art form, and readers are very sophisticated. They've seen every trick. It's really hard to give people an original experience at this point that they haven't seen before. They're just very savvy.
You know what, Bill? That is so true, and there's a part of me that goes, "Geez, that's so sad," but it is true. I mean, everything's been done and everything's been redone, and then it's hashed, and then it's rehashed, and then it's triple hashed, and then your hash looks like half hash of a hash of a hash, and you just go, Jesus, isn't there somebody somewhere that does something really thoroughly original? And so when I think Gone Girl, when Gone Girl came out, using that as an example, everyone was like, what? That's original, right? So, and then you had all the outliers who came inbound to try to copy it, and right down to calling it with anything with the name girl in it, and tried to bastardize it. And anyway, so I don't want to beat that point, but
yeah, it's true. Well, it's also true that you're trying to square the circle to some extent, because I always try to work within a template. I always start from something familiar. Defending Jacob couldn't have been a more familiar format. It's just a courtroom story. And within that template, you're trying to bend the rules just enough. So I think readers do like to feel that there's something familiar about the book, and at the same time, they want to feel that there's something absolutely new and original about the book. And so if you can introduce them to it in a way that promises something, that promises both, that promises an original experience and also promises a familiar experience, that's the circle you're trying to square. And it's, as a reader, I love experiences like that. I love when you are in the hands of a writer, and I think you sense this right from page one with a book where it's going to work. You just kind of know. You just kind of know that I'll follow this guy, because there's something about it that tells me this is going to work. He's going to be able to land this plane.
I trusted you. I'd never heard of you. I'll be straight up. I mean, I didn't even know. When I drilled down on it, I'm like, wait a minute. And I'm talking to your publicist, or maybe the publisher, and I'm blah, 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 yeah. Oh, wait, he wrote Defending Jacob? Yeah. I don't know who he is, but give it to me, right? And so I started devouring it. I'm like, holy balls. All right, well, I usually tend to do this, Bill. I will highlight, I'll make little notes, and then I realized as I was prepping for this morning when I started around 5 o'clock, I went, oh, everything I go to want to talk about, I'm going to give something away, so I'm not going to do that. I will say this. A, read this friggin' book. B, if you get halfway through, well, when you hit book 2, it's going to blow your mind off the top of your skull. Number 3, if your palms are not sweating I marked it just to make sure, as you'll see the little thing there. Right about
Yeah,
exactly.
you got a lot going on in that book. A lot of pen marks there. You got your money's worth.
Pen marks, fold pages. My mother would kill me.
My mother would too.
Yeah.
Her books were immaculate when she was done.
I know, it's terrible. If I folded a corner, my mother would look at me like I had just sworn at her. She's like, that's what bookmarks are for.
Well, this is the thing too with the switch to digital. It used to be that books as objects were these precious things, and now it just kind of feels like, oh, this could be an ebook just as easily, and I'm just scrolling on my phone, and the object itself doesn't seem to have as much value.
All right.
It's also funny that there's not books around anymore. You can have people who are big readers, and you walk into their house and there's no books around because they've been reading on a Kindle for years.
All right, I'm gonna give you something right now. Well, I'm not gonna turn the camera around. I have a couple of hundred books stacked, literally. I mean, this looks kind of, oh look, he's got a bookcase, which is boring. But I've got piles and piles and piles on the floor because I have run out of space. And when publicists reach out to me, they go, David, I can send you a PDF or I can send you an ebook right now. It wouldn't be a problem. I'm like, no, I want to feel it. I want to touch it. I want to smell it. I mean, I know that's old school, but I'm old school. So there you go. I want to make notes in it. I want to bend the corners. I want to put little stickies in it because A, it's homework. B, that's the way I enjoy it. So shut up. All right. Where was I? Okay. Palm sweat. All right. I know I'm really tight on time, so I'm going to really fly through the remainder of this. There's 2 things I want to talk about if you just spend a second with me, and we've kind of covered some of it, but I want to do it. One is process, one is business. So what's your process? I just kind of dig that because I'm a writer too. I know you don't know about the show or me, but I'm telling you right now. What's your process when you're crafting a story? And I realize, it's only the 4th book, which is mind-blowing to me, but give us a little inside scoop to Bill's life.
I wouldn't even I know other writers are very regular about their process. I don't really have one thing that I do, only because everything that I do eventually fails. And so I'm constantly kind of switching things up, and when things get stuck, which they inevitably do, I switch. So now behind the computer I'm looking at is a pen and paper, and that's how I've been writing for the last few days. It's just on pen and paper because nothing else is working. So for me, it's always about finding a process that will work, and I'm constantly tweaking and experimenting to keep making progress. I find that I tend to overthink and overplan, and I am way too reluctant to write imperfectly. And so it's always about moving myself from thinking to writing. And so I hesitate to give prescriptive answers about, this is the way to do it, and this is what my process is, because what I'm doing this week probably won't be the same as what I'm doing next week.
Okay. Well, you're basically
failing, which I do consistently.
Well, you're fine-tuning things. You're finding out what works now. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, now let's flip the coin and talk about the business. Now, there's the business side of writing, which a lot of authors go, oh my God, I can't talk about that. I'm going to get a headache. Yeah, but I want to know what you, Bill, have learned in this relatively short time about the business of this industry. And it is, and if in my opinion, if you don't look at this as a business, it's not a glorified hobby, then I think you're missing the point. How about you?
I have been very lucky in that sense, in that I have been able, I've basically been paid enough that I've been able to pursue book writing the way I want to do it. I haven't had to cut too many corners. The other thing is, this wasn't something that I set out to do. And so I've always considered this kind of provisional. And and I think for a writer or any other artist, you go from project to project. I've never really thought of it as a career because even now it just doesn't seem like a smart way to make a living. There's no security, there's no paycheck, there's no retirement plan, there's no health care. It's just a precarious way to go. So to me, it's always just been about focusing on the project that's on your desk at that moment and just trying to be so good that they can't ignore you. And what that means in practice is being as good as you can be. As I say, it's working at the extreme outer limit of your talent. And if it's not good enough, it's not good enough. I mean, my approach has always been, when this ends, and it could end with any book, and I've been prepared for it to end with any book, I would accept that, and I would go and do other things if I had to. And that frees you to go for it, to swing for the fences. I don't want to be a single sitter. I am content to strike out occasionally if that's the price, and to agonize on the way to finishing a book if that's the price.
I realize that we have just touched on what is my closing question I ask everyone, so I'm going to lay this out for you so you can be stirring it in the pot on the stove there in the back of your head as I take one more point to get there to, which is always my best piece of writing advice. That's what I close with. But you kind of touched on it, and I find myself wanting to say, what do you think it takes to become a success, especially in this frenzied arena? I mean, besides being tenacious and dogged and putting in the time, I think there's an element of hopefulness. But I mean, and again, in the time that you've been doing it, what do you think? And maybe it's just, hey, I had one, and if defending Jacob is it, or All That Is Mine maybe does well in sales but doesn't get picked up, I feel good about it. I mean, what do you feel like organically success is?
I think that's, as I say, I always hesitate to give advice to other writers because I feel like everyone's experience of this and everybody's process is idiosyncratic, and what works for one person won't work for the next. And the main thing is to stick with it, as we've said. But having said that, I would say that in my experience, there are a lot of people who will tell you to be regular and work to quotas, produce so many words a day, and accumulate a manuscript that way. And that's all 100% true. You have to have your processes in place. But I would counter that by saying what you rarely hear is to aim high, be excellent, take a risk. Don't just write 1,000 words for the sake of writing 1,000 words. Try to be great.
Yeah.
Try to write something that you feel passionate about, because the reader will sense your passion and your high aspirations and will cut you a break. And they'll wait between your books, and they'll attach to you in a way that, to me, the grinder kind of books, the books that are written to a genre, they don't imprint a reader the same way.
Yeah.
And so I guess what I would say is, yes, do all of those good, industrious, disciplined sort of habits that everybody prescribes to people. Also, write with your heart. Invest in it. Throw yourself into the whole thing. You're not a banker. You're not an accountant.
Thank God.
The whole point of going into this is to live with passion. And if that passion doesn't make it into your books because you had to write 1,000 words a day, even if it's a Tuesday morning in February and you're really not feeling like you have much to say that day, it isn't worth the price, and it shows in the work.
Yeah.
You wind up producing a lot of stuff with regularity that maybe doesn't make you proud when you get to the end.
Yeah.
I would like to think, as I lie on my deathbed, that when I look over at that shelf of books, I may not say those are all immortal, transcendent, 1,000-year books, but I can say each of them was the very best I could do at that moment. and I never, I never choked up on the bat just because I was swinging for a single.
Well, and that's superb. And so we've got our best piece of writing advice there. And you made me think of something, Bill. I'm a closet filmmaker. I fortunately was able to take one of my very first stories that I self-published and raised the money and did a film. And I was the director of the film as well. And you made me think of something really unique. And that was, I'd have an actor in a scene, and the actor would be delivering a line that was on the page that I'd written, by the way, and they were delivering it. I'm like, yeah, okay, that's good. And they're like, okay, you ready to move on? And I'm like, I think you've got something more. And you could always tell the actors who would say, oh, okay, if I could figure out a way to say to them, Bill, in this scene, I want you to take the words. First of all, you're going to internalize them as the character, but I want you to find a way to get that story across to me that maybe you haven't seen anywhere else or done anywhere else in another one of your projects. And it was in those moments when you'd see them take, and that light of acknowledgement would go on. They'd go, oh, okay, I've got it. And then they would stop and take their moment. I'd call for action. It would be a little pause, and then they would deliver something that was completely different. And 99 times out of 100, that was the moment they got on the screen.
Right. And imagine how difficult that job is to do. There's a scene in Defending Jacob like that where the dad of the murdered child recalls the child and he comes to tears as he's doing it. And the actor doing that, in order to get himself into the place where he could deliver that performance, was reading a letter from his own child and sort of getting himself into it. And that's the kind of commitment and price that you need to be willing to pay. This isn't a job where you can just show up. You have to show up and have everything in it. And if not, you'll produce a lot of stuff. And honestly, that's only realistic. Most people, most days, are not committing that deeply to their work, and they're not delivering at their utmost. And so, you won't hit it out of the park every day. But the idea is that only your A material counts.
Yeah, you can't phone it in. If you'd like to learn more about William, WilliamLanday.com is the place. The book, of course, All That Is Mine, I Carry With Me. If I spend the next 12 minutes admonishing my viewer listener to go buy this book, it would be a waste of time because you have places to be. But I got to tell you something. This should be tip top on your list of books to read. It drops on the 7th. Go ahead and pre-order it now, for crying out loud. I'm sure there's plenty of places, right, Bill, that you can order this?
Yes, and in fact, if you go to the website, there's a link. It's actually a link to the publisher page where they have aggregated all of those places where you can pre-order it online.
Your website is elegant, by the way, very clean and fresh. And I didn't want to say this, Bill. While I was digging in a aforementioned website, WilliamLanday.com, I know that one book I have to read. Maybe what I'll do is I'll get you to autograph and send me a copy. I'll buy it from you, but it's The Strangler. And here's why. You had me at this line. The Strangler combines the family drama of Defending Jacob and the hard-boiled noir edge of L.A. Confidential. Bam.
Imagine L.A. Confidential transported to Boston in 1963. That's the premise, and it's just a gritty, old school kind of story.
Oh, I am so in. But I do not want to end the show on that. I want to end the show on All That Is Mine, I Carry With Me, and make sure we're promoting this bad boy.
You're much better at marketing than me.
Well, I got to tell you something, Bill. This, one more time, one of the best books I've read. I think my wife, who's like, oh, how do you read all those? I'm like, babe, you got a little stack over there on the nightstand. Put this one right on the top. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you. That's very kind of you.
Well, thank you for your time. We had a little bit of a challenge putting our schedules together. Thank you for your patience. We had some snafus. It's all ironed out. It doesn't matter because we're here. We're doing it. You're an awesome writer. I cannot wait to read what you've got next, which I know you're handwriting now, right?
Yes, for now.
And it will come out probably...
You never know.
You never know.
A long way to go.
Bill, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks again to Bill Landay. All that is mine, I carry with me. Yeah, you got a pretty good idea how I feel about that book. All right, folks, coming up on the next Thriller Zone, New York Times best-selling author Deborah Crombie. She's got a novel on her hands. It's called A Killing of Innocence, and it's a doozy. I'm David Temple, your host. I'll see you next time for another edition of the Thriller Zone.
The